You know what? Sometimes it's pretty neat when the Spirit of God ambushes someone who's trying to communicate from the stage. That's pretty neat. If you were here a couple of weeks ago for one of our Christmas Eve services, or perhaps you watched us online, which probably includes just about all of you, at a certain point in my message, I was talking about people who demonstrate what Eugene Peterson said, and I'm kind of claiming it: long devotion in the same direction. And so I introduced you to our friends. This is Ray and Edith Lennons. And Ray and Edith have been our friends for more than 40 years, and they've been in this church for a lot longer than that, and they just live right there on the other side of that wall, basically. And I will forever have this image of Ray and Edith. There's a little bitty path through that little patch of woods right there, and they would walk together to church and back, holding hands. And they both turned 100 back this fall. And I have sad news for you today. Edith passed away yesterday at about 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon, peaceably. The Lennons have been my champions, y'all. I'm just telling you, in so many ways. And I thought about Ray this morning, and I thought, wow, had they both lived until the 6th of March this year, they would have been married 78 years. And Ray had to wake up this morning for the first time in a long time without her. I loved them. So God, we ask you to, first of all, we just want to thank you for those people who come along sometimes once in a lifetime, sometimes many times, and we say, wow, long devotion, same direction. Thank you for Edith, for her faithfulness, steadfastness, for her devotion and love for Jesus. And I would ask you, God, in your mercy and grace, would you protect Ray today and for as long as his life continues until they are together again. And we thank you that these were people who lived among us and lived with us in our family and were able to demonstrate what we all claim and what we all desire: trustworthiness in following Jesus, in whose name we pray. Amen. So, welcome to St. Mark's Church, and my name is Bob. I'm one of the pastors here. Thank you for those of you who have chosen to join us online, and I'm sure there are many of you. So, last fall, I did something that I've probably done less than 3 or 4 times in almost 48 years of preaching. I scrapped a sermon midweek. No kidding. I mean, and I thought, no, this sermon's not working. I've got to go in a different direction. Had no idea what that direction might be. Now, those of you who have known me for a long time understand that I have some OCD tendencies about working ahead. Sometimes I'm always ahead by weeks and sometimes even months, maybe several months. I have a Methodist preacher friend who was a classmate of mine over at Duke Divinity School a long time ago. He starts writing his sermons on Saturday. Sometimes has to stay up practically all night on Saturday night. Claims he works better under pressure. But now this was the same dude who, when we were in the seminary, he would delay his massive reading requirements. Sometimes like 1,000 pages just a day or two before the final exam. Now take me out back and shoot me. It's just not my style. Well, even though writing sermons and preaching are not his most favorite thing to do in ministry, he's an above average communicator, does quite well with it. Anyway, so this was Tuesday, back in the fall. The outline that I'd put together the day before, it absolutely wasn't working, so I just ditched it, got up Wednesday morning really early, and some of you know that I'm a very early riser, so this was really early, created another outline, started to put a skeleton manuscript together, as usual, closed things up around 11 o'clock, headed to the YMCA to work out, got back home a couple of hours later. I was feeling kind of a bounce in my steps. I was feeling hopeful, replenished, and ready to get started. Sat down, started working on finalizing some research and putting a few words together here and there. So then when I woke up my computer, instead of seeing the outline that I had written that Wednesday morning and a little bit of a sermon narrative, this is what I got. That is better known as the Pinwheel of Death. Some of you know about that. But not to worry, because every now and then the pinwheel shows up, and it's just, I think it's maybe God's way of stepping in to say, hey, Bob, just show a little patience. Or like my wife Susan, when she wakes up in the morning, she needs space. She's not a morning person like me, so show a little patience. I grabbed some lunch, came back to my computer 5 minutes later. I thought that was patient, right? That's all I saw. Now, some people call that a beach ball. Not me. I mean, I don't want to be caught on a beach or anything else with the pinwheel of death. I happen to be the humble owner of several Apple products. Their reliability is always excellent. So when in doubt, if you've got a Mac computer, what do? You restart. You reboot the thing. And still the pinwheel of death. I tried the restart process again. This time there was nothing. The screen went black. I couldn't even get the pinwheel to come back. There was absolutely nothing. So when in doubt, for years, I've been going back to something that Benjamin Franklin said probably more than 200 years ago. He said, when in doubt, don't. Just do something. I'm thinking, hey, old Ben, he never did have the pinwheel of death, so what does he know about this? But I went with the do something option. I called the IT guy here at the church in his usual fashion. He said, like he always does, Bob, stay calm. This is not a problem. Here's what you need to do. And then he asked me the $64,000 question. Bob, tell me what you want to recover. A sermon. A sermon, dude. I mean, so he walks me through the recovery process, and guess what? We successfully were able to reboot the computer. The pinwheel of death had disappeared, and so had my information. Nothing. Bob, don't you have one of those automatic saves on your, come on, y'all. This is meticulous, conscientious, systematic overachiever, anal retentive Bob you're talking to here. I've got so many redundancies on my stuff. I mean, after I adjusted to the bad news, so it's Wednesday afternoon, almost dinner time, 2 dysfunctional sermons in the same week. So just for fun, I texted my old Methodist buddy. And I said, hey, I've got a little problem here. You got anything in this, on this subject? He texted me back and said, Bob, it's Wednesday, man. I don't have anything. And I thought, yeah, you. Now, some of you insensitive types, you're sitting there thinking, I think I remember that week, Bob. I think I remember that sermon that you finally, yeah, look, come on, y'all can humor me if you want to. Some of y'all can't remember a sermon until you get to the parking lot, so don't kid around with me. So here we are. We are zeroing in on week number 43 of the consequences and repercussions of the coronavirus. Can you say 10 months, 301 days? And one of the questions that I want to put right in front of you as we start to hear, some of y'all have already had vaccinations, I'm sure. Maybe we're going to soon start relaxing some of the COVID restrictions. A question that's really been kind of pressing on me for quite a few months, maybe way back into the spring at least, is, so what do you want to recover? I'm sure many of you are like me. Over the past 10 months, you've had some challenges with patience. The medical professionals, the scientists, politicians, pharmaceutical companies, they've had endless press conferences promising this is what you can expect and here's what it's going to take for the world to reopen again. It seems like everybody wants to suggest a recovery strategy. A few months ago, we even did a church-wide survey. We asked you a bunch of questions. We were thinking about maybe regathering like we're doing right now. And just so you know, we started basing some of our decisions, week-to-week decisions, on some of the information that you told us. Well, let me tell you something. Some of y'all fibbed. Y'all just did. Some of y'all didn't tell the truth because it didn't kind of pan out the way you said it was going to. But then I thought, I always have to say, Bob, come on now, remember that you are the pastor of one of maybe the largest collection of centers in West Burlington, so you don't faze me with your hypocrisy. Our elders have developed several trusted sources from Christian leadership all over the country. And these are people who study the data and they evaluate, and we read their predictions and best practices, and you can talk to any of the elders. We talk about those things every single week at our meetings. We're trying to make faithful decisions given the priorities of our mission at SMC. But the truth is, every single one of you, all of us, we've all lost something in the past 10 months. Nobody has escaped this one. It might not be, for you, it might not be something, it might be a whole list of somethings. My personal motivation in this series is not and has not been to see, so how soon can we get back to normal? There are people a lot smarter than me, and they're working on that one. My personal motivation is all about this. Will we, I'm talking about we at SMC, will we demonstrate the wisdom to recover those things which are of highest value, the non-negotiables? When we start to move back into life as it used to be, wisdom will probably help us identify those things that, here are things we must recover, and then here are things that are optional, and then there are going to be some things that we will discard as excessive, non-essential baggage. So my hope is to see, to take a look in this Reboot series and see if maybe we can all discover a little bit better operating system than we had before the second week of March 2020. I really am convinced, I really believe this. If we are careful, if we're sensitive, if we're wise, we have a chance one of these days to move back into life and be better, maybe better than ever. For those of us who decide to stay careless and foolish and even reckless, there's a chance that we're going to sink right back into the same old routine, and that'll be too bad. I'm not talking about government policies and stimulus money, or how long is it going to be before the kids get back into the classroom, or when will our favorite restaurant safely reopen, and 1,000 other questions. I want to focus on personal recovery, yours and mine. And where will we put our focus as a church and as a body of believers like this as we start to recover some of the things that have been lost, so that we don't needlessly drag some things back into the future? Just about every arena of our American culture has been talking about this might happen, this should happen, this could happen, this ought to happen after the world opens up again. Every city around the country, companies, corporations, schools and universities, restaurants, gyms, athletic teams, churches, we're all asking the question. So when the world opens up again, what can we expect? For example, companies and corporations have discovered over the past 10 months that they really didn't need to have these large, extensive travel budgets and these excessive expense accounts. Other companies have figured out that they really don't need to maintain a huge lease on property so that there can be a lot of office space when virtual space has worked out really fine for quite a few, maybe even better than it was in some cases. If I would have told you a year ago that much of corporate America could work great from home, those of you who are business leaders and CEOs would have said, no way. I mean, our staff, if we would have put our staff working at home, too many distractions and interruptions. Many of those same companies are finding out that if the work environment is good, if it's positive, if it allows for focus, if the demands are reasonable, that the location doesn't really mean all that much at all. Productivity typically will go up. But that's not a concern of mine. That's way outside of my parameter. My concern is, what about our personal habits and decisions? Our personal operating system concerning our career, our finances, our social preferences, how we invest our leisure time, our hobbies and habits, certainly how we measure our devotion to Christ and His church. And I'm saying that it's a must-do. It is a must-do that before Corona is safely in the rearview mirror, then we have to, and before we begin to try to reboot life as we used to know it, why don't we make the most of this season? We had no control over the pause. What sorts of things need to be recovered? And what are things that we need to forever delete from the system? In fact, I wonder how many of you would agree not everything that can be recovered should be. Can the preacher get a witness on that one? Not everything we can recover a lot, but not necessarily necessary. Not everything that was a part of our pre-COVID life was working well. So why would we be foolish enough to reach back, take hold of some baggage that didn't work in the first place, and drag it down into the future and let it weigh us down? That's a great question. What should be added back into our life, personally, relationally, financially, professionally, with your career, and certainly spiritually? And this is really hard for people like us because let me tell you, human beings are the best rationalizers on planet Earth. You know what rationalize means? It means to tell yourself a bunch of rational lies. If I could have surveyed this church last January and said, how are you doing? How's it going? You know what most of you would have said? Well, it's not perfect, but I'm fine. I'm okay, I'm fine. One of my friends who's been in recovery from alcohol addiction for decades, he tells me that just about every person who walks into a recovery meeting for the first time, you know what they'll say? I'm fine. Many of you, maybe most, you were convinced that last March you were fine. You would have said, yeah, I'm okay. And then as we further separated ourselves from some of that pre-pandemic life started to look really well. How many times have I heard people say, can we just get back to the way things used to be before COVID? But not everything that can be recovered should be. Yes? Yes. Let's go to Galatians chapter 6. The Apostle Paul is writing a letter to, these are first generation Christians. They have no background at all. I'm talking first generation believers. And he's going to try to help them to understand what is it like to live with a bona fide operating system a long time before Paul or anybody else knew about that phrase. And so he says that if any one of you thinks you're important when you're really not, you're only fooling yourself. When I start to deceive myself into thinking that, I'm fine, I've got everything under control, that's when I'm most likely to be hanging on to a bad operating system. But here's our challenge. It's really hard to know when you're deceiving yourself because we rationalize. We don't like to admit it, but come on, y'all. Most of us, we have a pair of these. You know what these are? Rose-colored glasses. This is why Paul, what does he say? What does it say? Each person should judge, that word also means test, his own actions. Now watch this now, and not compare himself with others. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so that word there that's translated judge or test, and I don't do this ever to try to impress you with my understanding of the Greek language, but every now and then a word is just so important. That word is dokemazo, and it means to examine. It means it's like put something under the microscope and find out, is it for real? Is this genuine? So he says each person should see if his own actions are genuine and for real and not compare himself with others. Do any of you chemical experts recognize this one? Zirconium dioxide, better known as cubic zirconium. Several years ago, fake diamonds, cubic zirconium. Now, look, I'm not into diamonds, so I can't tell if it's fake or real or not. You can't either. Maybe if you're a jeweler or something like that, but we can't tell. I can spot fake people faster than I can spot fake diamonds. It's one of the reasons why I purposefully have been doing this for decades. I build and nurture, take care of a relationship with a small group of advisors, and I trust these people implicitly. It's a very short list. I understand that, but these are people who are just overflowing with life experience. They've got lots of wisdom, and they can speak into my life with clarity, with time-tested understanding, with love and devotion, because they have tested these things out over the years, sometimes decades. Every now and then, I need to be talking to one of those people, and I will lay out my operating system, and I invite them to help me take a gut check, moral inventory of my life. And I need the purest people I can find, people who have my best interest at heart, but also reputable people who have lots of life experience. The last thing I need is for somebody I don't want somebody in my circle of counsel to show up wearing a pair of bad glasses, rose-colored glasses. Now, when I receive helpful advice, redemptive advice from one of the members of what I call my personal board of directors, what I do is I immediately take that information and I take it right to my chair time, which is 9 o'clock every single morning, and y'all know that. And then I start journaling, and I'm saying, God, I need some insight, and are these changes, would this be good? And, help me understand what your Spirit is up to. I have to be willing to bring everything out into the light. Let me illustrate that. If you've ever sat down with a financial advisor, then you know how the drill works. Let me just pause and say, if you're 25 years or older, get a financial advisor. Do it now. I think we were in our mid-40s maybe when we started meeting with an advisor. I wish we would have done it a lot sooner. So if you're about 25 years old or older, go find somebody that you can trust. He or she's going to say, let me see the whole picture. So what you do is you lay out your entire financial portfolio before somebody that you trust. This past fall, I made a recommendation, brand new married couple, and I said to them, you need to lay out before an advisor your financial portfolio. Well, they looked at me like a deer caught in the headlights and said, what's a financial portfolio? I said, that's why you need to be talking to somebody, because you need to understand that. If the advisor, if you say, well, we don't want to show the whole thing, if they're not able to see the whole puzzle, then they might not be able to give you the advice and the counsel that you need to make great decisions about your financial future, and who knows, about your legacy. The same is true when we start talking about a moral inventory, a spiritual inventory. Find somebody that you know has your best interest in mind, and then lay it all out there on the table. Now, it's good if you can do that before you start to make a whole bunch of careless and reckless choices that shove you further and further over into a deep and darker ditch. I'm not saying that a good financial advisor is not able to dig you out from underneath a mountain of careless financial decisions, but doesn't it seem to be wise to seek that advice before you get covered up? I'm also not saying that a great friend, a spiritual friend, is not able to somehow restore you after you have done something that leads to a moral collapse. But just like a doctor will talk to you about preventive health measures and adjustments, it's a good idea for us to protect our moral future with some reliable, time-tested boundaries. Verse 4, Pay careful attention to your own work, Paul says, for then you can get the satisfaction of a job well done. Now watch this, here he goes again. And you will not need to compare yourself to anyone else, for we are each responsible for our own conduct. What Paul is saying is that once we have thoroughly tested our motivations, our decisions, and the time that we spent over in the weeds, then we can begin to better focus on what our future could look like without compromising ourselves and without comparing ourselves with somebody else. Do y'all know about how comparison works? Comparison is deadly. You know what it's like to have a friend call and say, hey, how about if I pick you up this afternoon and we'll go out and grab a cup of coffee? And now you know this friend got a brand new car for Christmas because you saw it on Instagram. But when you get in that car, you have just forgotten. You don't realize how long it's been since you experienced that new car smell. Like, whoa. And then you're thinking, man, I'm glad I didn't volunteer to drive our old clunker. Smells like the Chinese food that we took out last night. But later on that day, you're thinking, 6 years, $340 a month. And you're thinking, that sesame chicken was pretty good last night. And what's a new car smell worth? But then, you know how we are. We reach for the old rose-colored glasses, and then we say, well, our debt's not as bad, ours not as bad as theirs is. And I'm glad we're not selfish like them, driving a new car. They wouldn't even fill up one Christmas shoebox. And then when our small group got together to help a Christmas cheer family, they wouldn't even contribute $50. Have you ever noticed that when we compare ourselves with somebody else, it's almost always somebody who is ahead of us or higher on the ladder of success, or someone who has a more prominent position in the company or more windows in their office or drives a newer car or a bigger house? We almost never compare ourselves with people who are below us, because that way we don't ask, I wonder how I could help somebody who's struggling. That's like saying, well, at least this coronavirus I had the flu and I also had the corona, and the corona wasn't as bad as the flu. But hey, you ought to talk to somebody who was in the hospital for 11 days and 3 of those days in ICU. A virus is a virus. It's going to have some negative effects on your life. That's why Paul says, what does he say? We are all each responsible for our own conduct, not someone else's. There's a moment, you see, when we have to bear down and say, I've got to be willing to carry my own responsibilities. I have to bear under my own decisions, but only after we've invited people to circle us and help us see without rose-colored glasses. Just as you select a doctor, a financial advisor, or even a church, you make those selections with great care. I strongly recommend that we carefully, wisely, prayerfully select a group of friends who are ahead of us that we will allow to speak influence into our lives. These are people who are spiritually, relationally, financially, with marriage, raising kids. These are all people who've been doing it for a while. For example, it probably won't help for you to go seek advice about your 14-year-old from somebody who's never raised a teenager. That makes sense. Wisdom, then, is like a life preserver when you feel like you're drowning. Wisdom is like a compass when you've lost your way or your instincts have stopped working. Wisdom is like a light when the next steps out in front of you seem dark and chaotic. How many times do you suppose we could have avoided a train wreck if we would have just listened and carefully made an assessment of the faithful advice from a great mentor? So Paul says, the person who is taught God's word should share all good things with the teacher. So what does that mean? What Paul is reminding us is that God has given us his word, the scriptures, as the irrefutable, the most trustworthy guide for essentially every challenge in life. So he says it's helpful to sit under the teaching of the Bible, and I've brought my sifter out on several occasions. So the Bible becomes kind of like the sifter. We pour our life, our questions, our decisions, and we sift them in through the scriptures to make sure that our life is lined up with the teachings of God's word. How many times could we have avoided a collision with the guardrails or wound up over in the ditch if we would have just sifted our choices through God's word? That's for you to answer. This is one of the reasons why we strongly suggest regular attendance in a church or an investment in a small group. A church like SMC, where the scriptures are taught as the final authority of both faith and practice, and where we teach unashamedly that the scriptures will apply to every single issue in life. Look at how Paul was writing this word of wisdom to his young apprentice named Timothy. And look at what Paul says. He says, all scripture is useful, all of it, to teach us what is true and to help us realize what is wrong in our lives. It corrects us when we are wrong and teaches us to do what is right. Let me explain that. I have friends, quite a few, who are invested in one of the many 12-step programs. I've only attended one AA meeting in my life, and that was at the invitation of the group leader. I was honored to be there. Didn't say a word in the entire meeting, but I sat in amazement and I listened to the transparency and the honesty of this group. And no kidding, I got in my car, and when I was driving away, I thought, God, that might be the best church in Burlington, North Carolina. Because those people, they weren't hiding from each other. They weren't playing games. They weren't comparing or anything. They were just saying, this is who I am. So it's one of the reasons why, believe it or not, I keep a copy. This is called the Big Book, the Alcoholics Anonymous, the Big Book. I keep this book close. These are specialized programs that are just oozing with wisdom. And you want to know why? Because everybody who sits in a 12-step program understands that life is never going to change as long as they look at their addictive behavior with rose-colored glasses. So the Big Book helps them to say, no, we'll go with the Big Book. We don't need the glasses any longer. My friends who are in recovery, they tell me that the men and women who struggle the longest with addiction are the ones who allow their pride, also known as rose-colored glasses, to be a roadblock and to keep them from honesty and transparency. So if you're serious about rebooting something in your life, but you need some course directions, the Big Book is pretty good. The Good Book is better. How many of you remember how many of you can go back far enough in your understanding of the scriptures to remember the very first deception in the history of humanity? Genesis chapter 3. The adversary said to Eve, now let me understand something. Did God tell you that you could not eat from anything, from any trees in the garden? Did he say you can't eat from all the trees? Well, she had to think about that for a while, and then she said, well, no. God said, of course we can eat from the trees in the garden, but it's only the fruit from the tree in the middle of the garden that we're not allowed to eat. Do you remember what the enemy said to her? So what did God tell you if it would happen? He said we would die. You won't die. Are you kidding? You won't die, but your eyes are going to be opened, and you won't need God any longer. And then the enemy said, your God has an oversized ego. He just doesn't want to share his authority with anybody. Deception. In other words, come on, Eve, try these glasses. See how they work for you. And you know what? We're all victims, aren't we? 5 decades ago, when I finally came to grips with the plans and purposes of God for my life, and I realized that God was calling me to full-time ministry, and I yielded my life and my future to Jesus, I said yes to a new purpose, to a new direction in life. It's not been perfect, but I'll tell you what, it's better than anything anybody else has had to offer, because it's a God thing. Rebooting always requires a moral inventory of your life and your future. This is when I sometimes have to take a deep breath, and I have to have a heart-to-heart conversation with the person that I see in the mirror. We look in the mirror, and what do we say? Well, I've done okay so far, been trying to do my own life on my terms and in my boundaries and with my margins. And, you know, I've decided that my stuff is just going to be better for me. And nearly every time, where does that road go? Disappointment, heartbreak, careless and reckless decisions, and a dead-end road almost every time. Does anybody know what this thing's called right here? That's not a walking track, by the way. Like if you go to a baseball game and, you know, so if you want to enjoy the game, they say, well, why don't you just go walk for a while before the game? No, that's not a walking track. That's called the warning track. I checked in with Mike Kennedy this week. I thought I knew the answer, but I just wanted to be sure. Mike attends this church. He's the head baseball coach over at Elon. And Mike understands the importance of this little stretch of property right here. It's the warning track. It's about 15 feet wide. And it's always, this one's dirt, and this is, that might be turf. I can't really tell. No, maybe real grass. But anyway, so the warning track is always made out of a different type of material. And that's because that when one of the fielders is chasing a baseball and he feels something change underneath his feet, he realizes he's got 3 more steps and he's going to get a serious headache, like full stop. like this.
Around here as they track the strikeouts two. Joyner off the end of the bat into deep right. The wall. O'Neal makes the catch to end the inning. That is a ball into left, well hit. Back is Hamilton to end the inning. What a catch.
Now, we all cringe, don't we, whenever we see those replays, those sequences. But come on, SMC, we've all had moments like that. We've violated the margins, God's margins, and we've wound up crashing over into the protective guardrails. And I'll tell you something, spiritually, sometimes a headache is the least of our challenges. I've seen people blow up their whole life. I don't know how many steps have you already used up on the warning track? I don't know. Some of you might be saying, Bob, come to think about it, I'm a little woozy right now. If you sense that you might be on a pathway toward a collision, find somebody you trust and allow them to help you do a life inventory. Some of you showed up here today. You didn't even know why you were coming, and you came here just to be reminded that there's a warning track in everybody's life, and it starts when you start telling yourself the truth. Is it scary? You bet. Is it liberating? No question. The truth is never without consequences. I understand that, but freedom is always a better option than a Genesis 3 lockdown. It just is. The coronavirus has revealed some things about life that we perhaps would not have been able to identify any other way. I wonder sometimes if God is saying, you've got this serious, massive pause. It's into 10 months now. So who's going to be wise enough to use that time to take an inventory and reboot if all you see is the pinwheel of death? I read a survey this week in preparation for this message that said that 3 out of 10 of us claim that we need to make significant changes in life. Quite frankly, I wonder if that number is not a little closer to maybe 5 or 6 out of 10. What adjustments do we need to make to keep our life safely between the guardrails? Come on, everybody, you know this. If we turn the clock back to January and February 2020 before COVID, if we were telling ourselves the truth, I'm talking about legitimate honesty, not the I'm fine stuff. We all know that there were things that we were carrying with us in life that needed to be eliminated or at least modified and readjusted. Some of you have determined that before last March and before the shutdown started, you had some unhealthy work habits. It wasn't working for you, your family, your kids, your marriage, your health. Certainly not your spiritual life. You were telling yourself, you know what you were telling your family? Come on, it's just a season. It's not going to last forever. I'm fine. So the question is, once we're able to finally get over on the other side of this virus, are some of you planning to, have you already decided, I'm going to jump back into what wasn't working before? Whatever that was. I think I might have mentioned this to you, maybe last summer when we were just partway into this pandemic. I have an acquaintance, he doesn't go to our church, but I know him well. And he confessed to me one day, he said, Bob, you know something? Honestly, I think COVID might have saved my marriage. And then he said, before this pandemic broke out, there was upper management. Now, he was a part of upper management. He's one of the directors. And he said, so, when we were all sent home, he said, I'll be honest with you, I was already developing a dangerous relationship with another married person in that same department. And so then when we were all sent home, it was a wake-up call for her and me, and we decided those conversations were going nowhere good. We were headed in the direction of a destructive train wreck. In their case, physical distance served a lot more than just COVID protection. Another man told me about some harmful activities in his life. He said, when I would travel on business, and he traveled a lot, he said, I was involved in, this is what he told me, this is a direct quote, innocent fun that was hurting nobody. And then once the company stopped all their travel after COVID, he said, It was like a wake-up call. He said, I hope I don't ever travel another day. It wasn't working for me. Some of you found yourself bored at home over the past 10 months, and that boredom led to some crazy online spending sprees. And now, as we start to dream about the possibility of the end of this virus, you realize, my credit cards are maxed out, and that financial hole that I had last February is deeper and darker than it ever was. Some of you had a wake-up call about some of your personal priorities. Maybe last January, I don't know. Did you see, was there a caution light already flashing for you? Like warning, pay attention. You know what most of you would have said, though? The light's been going. You know what you would have said? I'm fine. I'm okay. You were telling your family, your spouse, I'm fine. You're probably telling the members of your SMC community group, hey, really, I'm fine. Don't worry about me. If you're married to somebody who's got a financial blind spot and you have one too, do you know what you're telling each other? We're fine. We're okay. Where did Paul start this message? Look at what he said. If any one of you thinks you're important when you're really not, you're only fooling yourself. And then a few verses later, one of the most quoted verses in all the Bible, he says, make no mistake about this. You can never make a fool out of God. Whatever you plant is what you will harvest. Now, the old school way of saying that is if you sow weeds, you're going to get weeds. You're not going to get a vegetable garden. You reap what you sow. It's one of the surest principles in all the universe. It was Andy Stanley who several years ago took the reap what you sow, and then he sort of twisted it a little bit, and he came up with this phrase, direction determines destination. I've preached on it many times. In other words, if this afternoon you are on I-40 westbound, you can get to Asheville in a few hours, and if you keep going a couple more hours, you'll be in Knoxville, Tennessee, but you will not wind up in Wilmington, Charleston, or Richmond. It's not going to happen. So we're going to spend this winter preaching series thinking about things that we should recover after the pandemic, some things that should be restored, and then things that we should remove and delete and cancel and eliminate. It's about change. It's about changing our attitudes, our decisions, and our future based on more accurate information, surrounded by some great, trusted friends and counselors, and what God has especially given us in His Word. Some of you knew before you ever heard the word corona. You'd never heard about lockdowns, quarantines, distancing, and sheltering in place. You knew before then. You saw the flashing light that there were some things out of whack in your life. Might have been a lifestyle decision that you were making. Maybe your schedules were taking you fast, but nowhere fast. We all know people who have tested positive for COVID. Some were asymptomatic, didn't even know they had it. Others were laid up for a few days, feeling pretty yucky. Some were hospitalized, maybe even in intensive care for a while. Probably we all know somebody for various reasons who did not overcome the infection. But those numbers, listen, those numbers are relatively modest when compared to something that's a whole lot worse than a virus. Some of us had developed patterns of behavior before last March that were threatening to sink our boat. And maybe you wish that you would have had a reset button, or maybe rebooted, starting some things over again. That's what we're going to talk about in the coming weeks. This series is going to be very practical, and especially during this season that we're living through. So I'm going to challenge you, and the volunteers are going to hand these cards out when you're on the way out today, but I want to challenge every single one of you to do a moral inventory, a 2021 moral inventory. And I'm going to give you some help with this, but so you're going to read this, and And, I challenge you to take it seriously. The real reason my career has been a priority over family is, the real reason our family schedules have been out of control is, the real reason I consistently spend more than I make is, the real reason I'm not more generous is, the real reason some of my moral decisions have violated God's priorities is, the real reason I've not been totally honest with my spouse is, the real reason this shutdown has been so hard is, the real reason why this pandemic is driving me nuts is, the real reason I need something to take the edge off is, the real reason I've not made God and faith in church a priority is. So what's wrong with doing it now? A spiritual inventory. What would it take then to start to make some positive, life-giving adjustments? You're not doing yourself any favors, I'll tell you, by refusing to look at the inventory and by refusing to invite God or anybody else, some trusted spiritual friend, to speak into your life. Now, I understand that some of you're afraid to give this another thought. Some of you will have discarded this. I mean, you might not throw the card away, but you will have discarded this before you get to your car in the parking lot. Or if you're watching from home, before you can get up and go get a second cup of coffee, you will have discarded this. But let me challenge you this way. What is the price tag for personal freedom? Put a price on that for me. What if your relationship with God, your marriage, your family, your health, your finances, your future, what if all of that's at stake? The staff and the elders at SMC, we are totally committed to helping all of us discover a better operating system in 2021 and to figure out how to reboot life, if necessary, for the sake of the future. Some of you are thinking, Bob, I don't know where to start. This is where you're going to find the backside of this card to be so helpful. You've already heard Megan on the video talk about all the things that are coming up. On the back is a quick summary of all the events and the classes and so that are happening here in the church that are going to be so helpful. And hey, look, if you're watching online and you say, well, I'd like to have one of those cards, well, just go on the website, smc.church, and right there on the main page, you'll see it says Moral Inventory Statements, and just click that and you'll have a downloadable, and you can do your own card. This could become one of your 2021 protocols, a spiritual inventory where you can take your life to a brand new level. What's to lose? Hey, look, I'm all for seeing the schools open. I've got a couple of kids over, grandkids in Wake County. They haven't been to school forever, it seems like. I hope that all of you that have had your career upended during the pandemic will start to see some light at the end of a dark season. I sincerely hope that all of us will be back to basics sooner than later. I'd love for the economy and businesses to recover just like you do, but more than anything else, I want us to recover. I'm praying daily, and some of you who know me, you know I don't miss a day. I'm praying every day that whatever shape the new normal is, and I can't see it yet, and probably you can't either, but I want it to be for your good and for God's glory. Here's how Paul concludes this section. He says, so let's not get tired of doing good, what is good, at just the right time. We will reap a harvest of blessing if we don't give up. So if you wake up tomorrow and this is what your life feels like, and it's a pinwheel of death, if you say, man, the pinwheel has hijacked my life, let's be sober-minded. Let's make some wise decisions and choices. Let's do the right things. It's going to require some courageous decisions. And let's start to take some steps toward a future and see what God has in store with us, for us. What's to lose? By the way, do y'all know why a lot of times, almost every week I guess, but do y'all know why I say, I love you, SMC? Y'all know why I do that? Because it's true. I do. I love you. I want something better for you than even you've imagined. It's life lived according to the plans, the passions, the priorities of Jesus. Come on up, Nick, and get us out of here. And hey, look, I'm glad you're here today. I'll see you next week. And I love you, SMC.